Living with agoraphobia can feel like being trapped in your own world, where every step outside is a quiet battle against an invisible force. For years, the thought of open spaces and crowds kept me locked inside, away from the simple joys of fresh air and movement. But slowly, with the help of therapy and a deep well of determination, I began to reclaim pieces of my life. Walking became my gentle way back. A short loop near home, just a kilometer or so, taken in the hush of early mornings or the calm of late evenings when the streets were empty and peaceful. It wasn't the vast outdoors that frightened me most. It was the unpredictability of people, the chance encounters that could shatter my fragile sense of safety. Yet on those quiet paths, I found a rhythm, a small victory in each stride, even as exhaustion tugged at me. One evening, as the light faded and a soft breeze stirred the leaves, something shifted. The bushes along the side street rustled in a way that didn't match the wind's whisper, a steady, almost deliberate pattern that made my skin prickle with unease. I paused, peering closer, telling myself it was nothing, just nature playing its tricks. But when I removed my headphones, the world sharpened, and there it was. The sound of breathing, quiet but labored, like someone hiding just out of sight. My heart pounded as I spotted a gap in the hedge and saw a figure slip away, vanishing around the corner where the thick foliage curved. Panic surged through me, and I turned back, hurrying home with the weight of that unseen presence lingering like a shadow. Days later, doubt crept in. Maybe it was all in my mind, a trick of anxiety or fatigue. I convinced myself to try again, reversing my route so the hedge-lined street came last, under the glow of streetlights that offered some comfort. Headphones off this time, I walked with heightened senses, and as I neared the bushes, the rustling returned, more insistent, the branches shaking visibly in the dim light. I stepped back, weighing my options. The long way around meant risking an ambush at the hedge's end. Instead, I quickened my pace, heart racing as the sounds followed. Footsteps jogging ahead, bushes trembling, panting breaths, and a chilling giggle when I stumbled. At the corner where the hedge thinned, I glimpsed a silhouette, thin as a reed, crouched low, back rising and falling with heavy gasps. I didn't stop to process it. I fled home, glancing over my shoulder until safety enveloped me. That encounter stole my courage for walks that day, leaving me wondering about the stranger's intentions, a mystery that haunts me still. If you're joining me for the first time, please consider subscribing to the channel and becoming part of our warm community. You won't want to miss the heartfelt stories we share next. This happened to me quite a while ago, but the memory remains as vivid as if it were yesterday, etched in my mind with every detail of that lonely night. As a woman working in a small startup call center, I sometimes took the night shift alone, a challenging role that often left me feeling overwhelmed and isolated. I'd call my boss in moments of uncertainty, my voice sometimes breaking with tears after a stressful call, the weight of handling everything solo pressing down on me. Over time, though, I grew into the job, finding my footing amid the quiet hours. On that particular night, things started smoothly. A part-timer joined me briefly before heading home, leaving me in the echoing silence of the empty office. During the day, the place buzzed with voices and activity, but at night it transformed into a still, shadowy realm with lights dimmed except in my small section, the darkness beyond feeling vast and unnerving. Simple tasks like fetching a fax meant dashing through unlit areas, my imagination conjuring hidden figures behind desks or machines, a fear that quickened my pulse every time. Around 1:00 a.m., as relief washed over me at the shift's end, I tidied up and approached the door, key in hand, ready to leave. Then came a peculiar sound, like water rushing, perhaps a toilet flushing, from right behind me, emanating from the nearby bathroom. At first, I assumed it was the part-timer, but realization hit. He'd left hours ago. Trying to steady my nerves, I considered it might be from the floor below, yet I knew the building should be empty at that hour, and the noise was unmistakably from our dark bathroom. Staring at the frosted window, I recalled the sensor-activated flush, confirming someone, or something, must be inside, triggering it deliberately. I stood frozen, silence my only ally, unwilling to investigate further, my mind racing with possibilities that chilled me to the core. Instead, I fled downstairs, locking the door behind me, escaping into the night with a sense of dread that lingered. Weeks later, feeling the strain of the job, I decided to quit, attributing the incident to overwork and possible hallucinations. My kind colleagues threw a farewell party where I overheard whispers of odd occurrences, items moved at night, unexplained sounds, rumors of a ghost, even sightings of a woman in the bathroom. Skeptical yet intrigued, I listened quietly. Months on, a former colleague updated me. The ghost was a homeless woman sneaking through the old building's vents, large enough for her to navigate. She'd been confronted and reacted aggressively, perhaps due to her unstable state. The revelation sent shivers through me, confirming my instincts that night after night, alone in the office. Someone had been there, unseen in the bathroom, watching or waiting. I'm grateful I left when I did, the thought of those hidden presences still stirring a deep unease. My story happened a few hours ago. I was watching the Champions League final with friends at a friend's house less than 2 km from my own. At the end of the match, everybody was going their own ways home. My friends left me at an intersection because they lived on the other side. Now I was all alone. To get home, I have to go through a passage kind of like a mini forest to save time. It was completely dark because the town hall turns off the lights at 1000 p.m. when I got closer to home. Arriving near the forest area, I got a bad feeling. That rarely ever happened to me when walking this path. I told myself that it was nothing and that I shouldn't worry too much. I was wrong. I could hear some sounds flashing in the distance for at least 30 seconds, then nothing. I didn't necessarily pay much attention to it, even though it was really weird. After a few seconds, though, I got an even more intense bad feeling, as if someone was staring down on me. I could hear footsteps. My brain told me to look behind me immediately, and when I turned around, I saw a figure walking very discreetly. They were crouched down with what I believed to be a knife in their hands. Seeing this, I ran like I'd never run before. I heard the steps behind me accelerating for about 10 seconds. I no longer heard them after, but I continued to sprint either way. I even fell to the ground about 200 m from my house. What frightened me the most during this chase is that during that time, the guy hadn't said a single word. All I could hear was his footsteps and his heavy breathing. I returned home without ever looking back. I then stayed on my terrace with my mother to tell her everything. Thankfully, it seemed the guy did not continue to chase me because I did not see him pass in front of my house. After one night on my cousin's farm, me, my 2 cousins, and 2 family friends were sitting on some hay bales as it got dark out, waiting for the coyotes to come out. Me and the 2 family friends decided it would be funny for one of us to throw a shoe to make some noise, then ditch my cousin on the hay bale. The 4 of us ran to the barn. My cousin stayed behind. We stayed in the barn for a good 30 minutes waiting for her to come find us, but she never did. We went to check on her, but she wasn't there. We found her back inside the house. The creepy part is when we talked to her, she asked which of us had been running around banging on the fence. We got really confused because we had run straight for the barn, so we asked her what she meant. Apparently, she had seen a person sneaking around in a black sweatshirt with the hood up. They had taken a stick and was just smacking it against the fence several times. She had thought it was us since we'd all been wearing black hoodies. We were certain she wasn't lying because she asked us first and proudly declared we did not scare her. The next day, all 5 of us were out fishing when my uncle said there had been 2 people out walking around by the gravel pit near the hay bales who we thought was 2 of us. We still don't know who that was sneaking out there that night, nor what their main goal was. If something like this has ever made you feel uneasy in a familiar place, please share your thoughts in the comments below. It's comforting to know we're not alone in these experiences. I work in a nursing home. About a month ago, an elderly woman who had been diagnosed with a severe mental disorder was introduced to our care home. She seemed perfectly coherent, and we even shared a conversation together. I was surprised by the diagnosis, to be honest. She was really switched on for her age, which was 75 years old. Her responses to questions and her conversations were quite articulate. It was to the point where my colleagues and I seriously doubted her diagnosis. She had been a total joy in her first morning at our care home. At least that's what I heard. I came into work as I was working the night shift that day. At about 2:00 a.m., the nurse call button was pressed. I went in to check on her, and she simply said that she'd pressed it by accident. I told her not to worry too much and thought nothing of it. I went to attend my chores down the hall, but not 10 seconds had passed by when the call light appeared again from her room. Another nurse responded this time. I remained in earshot for a moment, though. I was in the corridor, and her door was closed because it was so late. There was no other noise in the home going on, so I could hear just about every word they were saying. My colleague asked for the reason why she'd rung the bell. The lady said to her, "That man from before." "Yeah, what about him? He frightens me. He has 2 faces, you know. He really frightens me." The old lady went on further. "She has a beautiful face, but don't let her trick you. She wants to kill you. If you look in her eyes, she'll eat you. But he's a male member of staff, ma'am. Perhaps you can't see her. She's right there." The lady shouted. It was quite alarming to hear. This lady, who had been so pleasant until now, was shouting in the dead of night about something only she could see. It felt totally out of character. She sounded completely exasperated with it, too. I knew, though, that there were no doors or windows anybody could possibly be peering in at her through since we didn't have windows in our bedroom facilities. The only door was the one I'd entered earlier. Since my colleague wasn't aware I'd been eavesdropping, she came out of the room and saw me. She stepped back in shock and I said nothing. I carried on walking down the hall. It got to about 3:00 a.m. and it was time for my break to sleep for a couple of hours. By the time I'd woken up a little further into the morning, the lady was seemingly back to normal again. When I spoke to her, she harbored no ill feelings towards me, nor did she seem distressed at all when she saw me. I didn't think much more of it. When quitting time came, I went home as usual. When I came back to work 2 days later, though, things had changed quite a bit. The lady was now pressing the nurse call button every hour since 1:00 a.m. for the last 2 nights. She always stated there was someone in the room with her and she couldn't stand them just staring at her. She couldn't sleep. She could see people hanging from the ceiling, glaring at her. She had escalated so much it had been difficult to calm her down. This went on for about a month or so. She'd constantly ring the bell, now complaining of someone in the roof staring at her. Whenever I went to answer the call button, she would always say she'd rung the bell by mistake. She would then tell the next staff member that the woman who answered the call was frightening her, even though I was a man. I just want to throw out there that I looked nothing like a lady either. It was like this lady was frightened of death. It was manifesting in her everyday life, and she was seeing it everywhere. It's very frightening to see because in the daytime, she's the most coherent of all the patients in our facility. At night, it's like she truly falls ill, and she can see something that nobody else can. I think every now and then about what it means for me that she sees me as this demented thing that really scares her. Mostly I just pray for her, though. I pray for the day that she's not tormented by whatever illness comes to her at night. It's a very sad sight to see. I'm 25, born and raised in Arizona. This literally just happened to me, so I decided to share it with all of you wonderful people this evening. I'm a huge stoner, and so I don't drive. I decided to take a bus a few miles down to the dispensary. This was at about 8:30, I believe. I wanted to get a new Indica cart, Purple Punch. It's my favorite by far. I got it and walked back towards the bus stop to head on back home. As I walked closer to the bus bench, though, I noticed a guy was already sitting there. I didn't really think much of it. I'm antisocial, and so I always go into any social setting ready to be absolutely silent. I didn't even get a chance to do that this time. As I'm sitting down, he started asking me something. I had my headphones on, though, so I couldn't quite tell what he was saying. I took them off and asked him what he'd said. He responded, "Did you want to get your hair cut?" While staring at me with very wide eyes, not blinking at all. If I were a betting man, I'd say this guy was on something. I'm not here to judge anybody. I understand addiction very well. I just definitely was not expecting that question. I think I'm all right. I then noticed he was wearing an Arizona Cardinals uniform. I just so happened to be an Arizona Cardinals fan myself. So since my entire socializing ability revolves around sports, I decided to ask him, "Hey, you a Cardinals fan?" He looked at me kind of funny for a second. "No, I just got this a few months ago." Okay. "So how long you been cutting hair?" Without blinking, he answered immediately. "Just picked it up a few months ago. Who taught you how to cut it?" I asked, even more sketched out at this point. His eyes shifted and he said, "I learned on my own." "Come on, man, let me touch up the back a little bit." Mind you, he was consistently pushing to cut my hair throughout this entire conversation. I even told him, "Yo, I don't have any cash on me right now," indicating I couldn't even pay for the service even if I wanted to. He simply said it was no problem and that he had his clippers in his bag. I decided to just be real with the guy. "Hey, listen, I just don't feel comfortable getting haircuts from people I don't know, like at night and stuff. You feel me?" The guy never changed facial expressions for the entire interaction. He finally just said true that and continued to glare into my soul. Basically, I decided in that moment it was about time to just get out of here. Luckily, the bus stop was right in front of our local Circle K, a gas station for those who aren't familiar. I walked in there for a few minutes just to kill time and get away from this guy. Unfortunately, the bus was not showing up for another 17. I didn't want to stay long, though. I didn't want the employees to think I was trying to steal or something. Granted, I had a pretty good reason to be inside at the time. I waited about 6 to 7 minutes. Literally, as I'm walking out, I see the haircut guy walking in, staring into my soul once more. Luckily, I just walked past him and fled out of there to another bus stop down the street. The bus finally arrived. I saw the dude at the back of the bus, but he didn't try to bother me anymore. I made sure to keep my eyes the complete opposite of his direction the entire time. I tend to overthink most social situations I'm in, even if they're extremely quick. But how would you have handled that situation? Would you have let this guy cut your hair? I'm a nurse who works the night shift, and there have been 2 occasions where I've been stalked on my way home. I'd like to share them with you. This first one happened when I was living in Chicago. I was returning home on the last train of the night. It was around 12 or so. When you get off the train and exit the subway, there's a convenience store at the top of the stairs. My apartment at the time was about 7 minutes away from this store in a residential area. At that time of night when you get off the last train, the lights on the convenience store are pretty much the only light source in the area. The roads are pretty empty, too. Anyway, back onto the story. I was climbing up the subway stairs when I noticed a man waiting at the top of them, staring down at me. He kept widening his eyes as he stared at me. He was shifting around very restlessly, too. At that moment, I knew there was something off about this guy. I ignored the traffic lights and crossed the road. I decided to very quickly walk home. The situation was way too creepy to linger in. As I was walking along, though, I felt a presence behind me. I looked over my shoulder and noted that that weird guy from the subway entrance was now following me. He was closing the distance between us without any hesitation whatsoever. Instinctively, I started running. I remember running like crazy. I was so panicked and frightened that there was no one on the streets to help me. No passing cars, no people out walking. It was so dark, too. I ran up a pathway into somebody's private garden and pushed the gate aside. I hid there and crept around to the back of the house. It overlooked the road, so when I saw a taxi passing by, I saw my chance to escape this situation. The taxi driver must have seen how desperate I was because he slowed down right away. He pretty much saved me that night. After this event, I moved into an apartment right in front of a different train station. This area seemed much safer as it had 24-hour taxi services, thus it was well lit and was always busy with people, even at night. It was a very reassuring feeling to have others around. I had been living in this new place for about 2 years now when something else happened to me. Of course, it took place when I was coming home from my night shift yet again. In those days when I left the hospital to go home, I used to take this quick shortcut through a dark alleyway. It was there that I met the exact same man again. I quickly headed to the train station. I boarded my train and I saw him again. As I sat down, the man continued staring at me. I knew it was him because he was doing that weird, eye-widening thing I'd seen him do in the subway entrance. He must have followed me from the alleyway onto the train. I had a terrible feeling about this guy. He kept glancing over at me and fidgeting back and forth in his seat. The train started to pull into my destination. I got as close as I could to the doors. As soon as they opened, I sprinted out as fast as I could run to an exit. I knew they had to be busy at this moment. I even took off my jacket and tried to blend into the crowds of people. When I found a safe place to hide, I looked over my shoulder. I could see the man had indeed tried to follow me, but it seemed he'd lost me in the crowd. He was desperately searching the area for me. I knew how much danger I was in. Luckily, there was police presence at the west exit of the station. In the following days, I became very paranoid that that man might somehow know where I lived or might be waiting to ambush me at that station. The next time I got off at that stop, I told the police everything I could about the man. One of the officers actually seemed to know the man I was speaking of. They described him as a pervert. When he said that, shivers went down my spine. There are a lot of young nurses who worked late like I did back then. It's been 10 years on now. I still get creeped out thinking about it. As peaceful as it can be careful whenever you're walking home at night. You never know who you might run into. A few years back, I rented an apartment from a friend of mine. He had recently bought it and had it completely renovated. He put it up for sale, but couldn't find a buyer, so I offered to rent it in the meantime. After moving in, I quickly realized there was something wrong with the lady next door. She was around 45 but looked much older, and she would sit up all night listening to Christian radio shows and talking loudly to someone. It got to the point where I couldn't even sleep. So I went over to her place and asked her to keep it down, please. She opened her door and I quickly got a peek at her walls. They all had crosses painted on them in different colors and words like Jesus and angel scribbled everywhere. And the windows have been painted black, letting in no light at all. There were damp yellow-stained 50-year-old carpets with dog crap and cockroaches everywhere. No dog in sight, though. I asked her to keep it down once more. She gave me this crazy look and slammed the door shut in my face. She turned up the radio even louder. The next night, I had my girlfriend staying over. I woke up in the middle of the night to see a shadow of a person next to the bed looking down at us sleeping. I thought I was hallucinating as I usually do in the dark when I'm sleepy. But then the shadow started talking. It was my neighbor. She was holding something in her hand. She'd broken in sometime during the night, and who knows how long she was standing there. She walked out soon after. The next morning, I could hear someone making strange noises below my bedroom window. It was my neighbor talking to herself in tongues again. At this point, I was beyond scared. She was obviously very ill. I went upstairs and knocked on another person's door and asked what the hell was going on. The guy was just as scared as I was. Apparently, she'd broken into his apartment one evening as well while he was watching television with his kids. He got up from the couch to get a snack, only to find her hiding behind the couch, staring at him, holding a power drill in hand. Now I know what she was holding in her hand that night. At this stage, I was basically hysterical. I called the cops and they knew all about her. Apparently, she was a violent schizo and hadn't taken her meds in quite some time. They couldn't force her to or enter her apartment without her permission because she owned it. The only thing they could do was get her when she went outside. I sat up for the next 2 weeks waiting for her to run out of cigarettes. When I heard her leave at 2:00 a.m. to go across the road to 7-Eleven, I called the cops. They had 3 cars and a special van over in less than 2 minutes. They restrained her and tossed her in the van and drove her off to some special institution. It all happened in less than a minute. It's like she was never there. I never saw her again after. I still have nightmares about her looking down at me in my sleep. This happened when I was working as a part-time cleaner in a hospital. I would clean at about midnight as there were less patients and doctors around. Those were the working hours I'd been given, so I couldn't really complain at all. One night after all my cleaning was done, I had put my equipment away and got in the elevator and headed for the ground floor. At that time in the night, there were basically no doctors, nurses, nor anyone else around. It was really quiet. I couldn't hear or see any of the patients. I got in the elevator and pressed the button for the ground floor like always. Except this time, despite me pressing the button for the ground floor, the elevator continued to go downward down to the underground floors. I continued to press the button for the ground floor over and over, but it was no good. The elevator just wouldn't stop. Finally, it did come to a rest at the second basement floor. This was really weird. It had never happened before. I didn't like this floor at all, especially not at nighttime. All that was down here was the post-mortem examination rooms. So, who was calling the elevator down to this area at this time of night? I wondered if I really was the only night shift worker that night. Why would someone be messing with the elevator like this anyway? I got out of the elevator on this floor and went to check to see if anyone had wandered down here without permission. Behind me, I heard the sound of the elevator doors closing, which really shocked me. I heard the elevator start heading back up. Now I was down here alone. It was going non-stop to the highest floor in the building. I couldn't understand why the elevator was acting like this. Up to the area it was headed to, there was nothing but a storeroom and a door which accessed the roof. It was off limits to the patients anyway, and only the cleaning staff like me had any business going up there. I called the elevator back down to the floor I was on. It finally arrived, but when the doors opened, there was no one inside. There was something wrong, though. As I got in, I smelled something terrible. The elevator stank of copper, and I recognized that smell. It was the smell of blood. I could smell it all throughout this elevator area, yet the elevator was completely clean and spotless, at least from what I could see. I couldn't bear that smell. I had to get out and use the stairs on the floor above. As I entered the stairwell, though, I was certain that someone was watching me. It felt as though someone was nearby. I ran as fast as I could up those stairs, but I couldn't escape that feeling. I felt for sure that I was not alone, but every time I tried to look around and check, I couldn't actually see anybody else there. I finished my shift and felt extremely creeped out on the long walk home. Once I'd arrived back to my place, though, I felt a lot better. I had worked the next day, and I was a little bit apprehensive. I saw some of my colleagues, and they were asking me if I'd heard the news about last night. I said I didn't know and asked what happened. They said that someone had taken the elevator to the top floor and supposedly. They jumped off. The body was admitted to the morgue that night last night. It was shocking to hear that. I didn't really believe in anything paranormal, so I didn't make the connection to what happened the night before. I just went on with my work as usual. The next day was a day off for me. I invited a friend over for a few drinks. He's a pretty strange guy to some. He claims to have second sight or something. You know, the ability to sense the presence of the dead. I thought he might get a real kick out of my little mysterious experience, so I told him what happened. He listened carefully but began to fidget quite a bit. I figured he just needed to go to the toilet, so I ignored him. Suddenly, he shot to his feet and said he was leaving. I asked him what the problem was. I said I had loads more booze and I needed his help to drink it all. He couldn't be convinced to stay, though. I was annoyed at him, and instead of staying up and drinking alone, I decided to go to bed instead. I had a terrible nightmare that night. I was being forced into this small, confined area. Cold steel and metal was all around me. It was a horrible dream. The next day, I asked my friend what his problem was and why he'd left so abruptly. This is where it gets really weird. I'm just letting you know what he said, not saying I actually believe it myself. He said that while I was talking, for some reason, he looked over towards my door and saw someone peering in at us through the gap in the letter box. You know, the mail slot. I didn't like looking at the mail slot after that. I always wondered, could that poor person who jumped be a spirit or something who led me to the morgue and followed me home? Was that the thing that was watching me through the mail slot? Was that completely unrelated? I don't know. It's all hard to believe. I hope my friend was just messing with me. It wasn't really a funny prank if that was the case, though. I ended up moving away shortly after to get a better job anyway, and things got better after. Just a strange little tale I wanted to share. Thanks for listening. I am the oldest of 3 kids. I have a younger sister who was 8 at the time of this incident and a brother who was 6, while I myself was 12. For years, we lived in a relatively rural area. We weren't too far from a bigger city, but we couldn't see our nearest neighbors from our house. We had plenty of space to play in. Back then, those were happy times. My dad worked from home for one of the countless companies that started up during the big do boom in the 90s and made a good bit of money. That all ended with the crash in the early 2000s. My father lost his job, so we were forced to sell the house and move to a less expensive place in the city. Well, he looked for more work. The house must have been glamorous in its day. There was 3 stories and it was very spacious, even containing 2 staircases leading upstairs, a main one in the front and a smaller one in the kitchen. Sadly, the house had not been kept up with and was not in good shape anymore. It was also not in a good neighborhood either. It wasn't exactly a ghetto or anything, but it was definitely run down and shady. That's how we managed to get it for a price we could still afford. I remember being excited at the time because even as a little girl, I was always interested in ghosts and monsters, and it seemed like we were moving into a haunted house. I wish this was just a ghost story. But sadly, as they say, the living are far more terrifying than the dead. And during this time, my dad changed from the loving father he had always been to someone completely different, someone we were all very much afraid of. He struggled to find any stable work and began drinking as well. That would often make him very violent and abusive. Most of the time it was over money. He could drink away every last cent. But how dare my mother buy food or an occasional toy for us? His rage was usually directed at my mom, but if any of us kids dared to draw his attention during one of his rampages, he was always more than willing to turn on us and share the love. As the eldest, I was very protective of my younger siblings. I would usually round them up and quietly head across the street to a small park whenever my dad would start. In that way, we were safer. If we didn't make him angry, he would leave us alone. Usually, we'd head back around dark, and he would be in bed passed out by then. One night, however, he was in a particularly foul mood. The yelling was worse than ever. I could even hear him from the playground all the way across the street. When darkness rolled around several hours later, we finally headed home. I could still hear him yelling at my mom from the inside. Then I heard my mother screaming in pain and fear and the sound of glass breaking. I knew that something was wrong. I knew this was worse than usual. I told my brother and sister to go to the neighbors and get help, but my sister was terrified and wouldn't leave my side. My 6-year-old brother ran next door alone while we cautiously approached the house. When we got inside, we saw our mom was lying in the middle of the living room floor, bleeding. The furniture in the room was overturned, and the glass coffee table was shattered all over the floor. When she saw us, a look of terror came into her eyes. She gasped to run, but it was already too late. My dad heard us coming in and had hidden behind the front door, which he slammed shut and stepped in front of. In his hand was a large kitchen knife soaked in my mother's blood. His eyes were filled with rage. We did the only thing we could do and ran into the kitchen for the back door. He was fast enough to cut us off before we could get outside. He flipped over the kitchen table in front of the door and screamed, "Where do you think you're going?" We scrambled up the back staircase and I slammed the door, separating it from the kitchen, and locked it. And we were far from safe. There was nowhere for us to go but upstairs. My father beat on the door for several seconds, then stormed off toward the main staircase. I quietly opened the door and pulled my sister toward the basement instead of going upstairs. We had a playroom and a small living room. I slid the love seat up from the wall enough so my sister could get behind it and laid down. I then pushed it back as close to the wall as I could without crushing her. I did the same for myself with the couch. We laid there in terror for what felt like hours. I could hear my father shaking the house with his rage upstairs, looking all around for us. It sounded like he was flipping furniture and breaking down doors. He eventually figured out we weren't up there and did the same thing on the ground floor. I heard him coming down to the basement and cried silently in terror. And just as I could see his feet step off the final stair, there was a crash upstairs and loud footsteps rushing into the home. My dad retreated into the dark corner of the basement until eventually the police worked their way downstairs and arrested him. Even after they took him away, I was still too scared to move. They eventually found us and took us upstairs where my mother was being loaded into an ambulance. Thankfully, she survived, although I believe he would have killed her if we hadn't come home at that exact moment. We've never seen my father since. He wrote from prison a few times, but my mom never let us read the letters. All she did was tell us he said he was sorry, but that's all she would say. We never went to visit him and moved across the country shortly after. He's still locked up as far as I know. As you can imagine, the entire family spent years in counseling after that night. My younger sister has attempted suicide twice, and I still have nightmares and trust issues to this day. I don't think any of us will ever completely get over it. I'm 24 now, and I still live with the effects of that one night to this day. When someone who is supposed to protect you and care for you turns into the one you should be afraid of, it's really traumatic. You never fully get over that, and you never truly trust anyone again. Like this story, if you've ever felt the deep pain of betrayal in a place that should be safe, and share it with a friend who might find solace in knowing others have walked through similar shadows. Lately, I've been rethinking my career choice. I currently work as a location manager in the city where I live. For those people who may not specifically know what I mean, when I say location manager, it basically means that I'm responsible for finding locations for directors to film and secure locations for film production. I know it may not seem like a glorious job, but this industry is quite crazy, and I had to secure any job I could get. I love movies and the entire entertainment industry. It's always been a dream of mine to work in this field one way or another. As it turns out, I was quite good at being a location manager. Over time, I was able to build up quite a bit of credibility, which made it even easier to secure locations. I worked on a bunch of films for the last several years, some bigger than others, of course, mostly some low-budget films. During my time doing this, I met a ton of famous actors and influential people in the industry. At this point, you're probably wondering why then I would be rethinking my career choice. Everything about this seems super cool so far. The simple answer is this world of film and entertainment really burns you out quicker than anything else. However, that's not the main reason why I've truly been rethinking my career. In actuality, the straw that broke the camel's back is much darker and more sinister. The last movie I worked on was not a great movie, plain and simple. Everybody is entitled to their opinions, of course, but objectively speaking, this was one of those ultra-sappy things you'd find on the Hallmark Channel. It just felt very uninspired. I will say, though, that the crew on this production was very amazing. I loved the writers and directors and even some of the actors. They were all very nice. We ended up getting to know each other and even going out to hang out on a couple of occasions. The beauty of working on these smaller productions is that you really get to form a bond with a lot of the crew, which is something I imagine doesn't really happen on massive Hollywood-type film sets. One of the extras in the film, who had a handful of lines, started to hang out with me quite a lot. Her name was Hannah, and like a lot of extras, she was, and I believe still is, an aspiring actress. Hannah is someone I would describe as remarkably beautiful. When she walked into the room, heads would turn. And that's not even an exaggeration. When the director met her, he was so blown away that he even gave her a very minor part in the movie. She literally only had like 5 lines, but I assume that's sort of a big deal for your very first outing. In the several weeks that we worked on the movie, Hannah seemed to take a real liking to me. At first, I was really into it as well. After Hannah's small part was over, she stuck around with me and helped me out a lot. She was basically an unofficial assistant and helped me with a lot of the day-to-day tasks. I made sure, of course, that I was able to pay her for her efforts, like any upstanding production would. Towards the end of the shooting, though, tensions can get a bit high and people can get really short with you. What happened on our last day of production was something altogether different, though. Often on film sets, filming can take place overnight, and that was the case for this final day of production. Hannah was on location with me, helping me out, but there seemed to be something off about her. She was always upbeat and excited, but tonight she was in another world. She was quiet, dismissive, and very rude, for a lack of a better word. I'm not sure what time it was, but it was sometime in the middle of the night. We had a small crew of art department guys setting up the location. I was there basically just overseeing everything, and Hannah was just there helping me. The director and the actors for the scene were there, but they were all resting in the back room for a moment while we were filming inside. When everyone finished, they all headed out, and it was just myself and Hannah in this location. In all the years I've worked on movies, I had never seen such a light crew. You could tell the feelings and vibes for this project just weren't all there. I tried making conversation with Hannah and joking around with her like usual, but all my efforts just sort of failed. She kept brushing me off. Honestly, I didn't really care anymore. I figured once we wrapped everything up, I'd never see her again. While I was awkwardly walking around the set trying to figure out what to do, I heard Hannah shout for me. It sounded like it was coming from quite a distance away. She had been right next to me, so I found it quite weird. I rushed over to make sure she was okay. When I got there, though, she was standing in the back of the room with all the lights off. I could barely even see her. The only lights were the lights shining into the room from the doorway I was now standing in. "Hannah, what's wrong? Are you all right? What's going on?" I called out with genuine concern. She just smiled at me and said almost in a seductive kind of voice that sounded a bit off, "I have something for you." As you may expect, my mind was racing. I had a feeling that maybe this girl had an interest in me, and now she wanted me to join her in this room alone. I approached her cautiously. I was feeling a bit of apprehension about this whole situation. When I was about 5 ft away from her, I noticed her hand behind her back. I stopped in place and tried to make a joke. "What do you have behind your back there? You're not going to stab me or something, are you?" I laughed, trying to make light of this strange situation. At that moment, Hannah started to cry uncontrollably. I didn't even know what I'd done to upset her. Before I could say anything, she started screaming at me. "I liked you so much, and all you ever cared about was this stupid movie. I hate you." As I tried to take in all that she just said, she drew a knife from behind her back. She ran right through me and knocked me right off my feet. My heart was beating out of my chest at this point. When I finally managed to get up where I was standing and looked down at the ground, I could see she had dropped a knife next to me. A real knife. For some reason, I never reported this to the director or the authorities. I have no idea why really. I just figured since nothing had actually happened to me, I was better off leaving it alone. The more time that passes, though, the more I think about that night and what might have happened if I just kept walking towards her. Would she have stabbed me? Or was it all just a trick? If it wasn't the middle of the night, would she have even tried anything like this in the first place? Perhaps the most horrifying thing, though, is I have no idea where she is or where she went after. She's got like no social media anymore. I looked and there were no other film credits either. At least not that I could find. This industry is crazy, man. You meet a lot of strange people who sometimes aren't all there. Take Hannah, for example. A normal, sweet, and beautiful girl one night and then the next brandishing a knife at me. I don't know if it was the sleep deprivation or all the hours we were working, but she just lost it. I think of the highs and lows of this industry. They've always taken a toll on me. As I've stated, I assume she's probably still trying to act, maybe under a different name or something. But clearly this poor girl had some inner demons, and it wouldn't surprise me one bit if some of them were in her head as well. In my mid-20s, I was trying to figure out a lot of aspects to my life. I was trying to get my future in order. I was never objectively a bad person, but somehow I always seemed to fall through the cracks anyway. I finished near the bottom of my class with my GPA, never went to college, experimented with some extracurricular things that you could say are illegal. I was never in any big trouble, but I also never really brought anything of substance to the table, if that makes sense. I was about a month away from my 26th birthday when I met Janelle. That's when I decided it was time to finally use my brain and become a decent member of society instead of a burnout. Only thing was due to my disturbing resume or lack thereof at this point in my life, I was finding it very difficult to get a job. Even jobs you may think anybody can get. I wouldn't even get a call back, even if I went out of my way to reach back out to them. I would follow up on applications but still never have my call returned. It hit me hard. Just as I was about to give up like I always did, Janelle found me an amazing job. Not glamorous by any means. But for someone like me, it was pretty amazing. The job was for an overnight warehouse worker. I would work from 9:00 p.m. until 6:30 a.m. loading up pallets with boxes. Though the main premise sounds simple enough, it was very physically taxing. The job was tough and we never had enough help. It was extremely hard to keep any help that did come once they would get in the door. Because of this, I found myself working alone a lot of the time until finally the company downsized. We started to work until 4:30 in the morning instead of 6:30. The little help that we had was spread thin. When I was working, I would put on headphones and just get into the zone. I didn't bother talking to anyone or even getting to know anyone else. Chances were I wouldn't even be seeing them in a week or two again anyway. Honestly, talking distracted me, and I was all about getting my job done and getting home. One night when I was nearing the end of my shift, I noticed a small-looking man standing about 5 ft away from me. I didn't really say anything at first. I figured it was a new employee just watching how I was doing things to get the hang of it. When I finished, I took off my headphones and asked the guy if he needed some help. Yeah, man. I hate to ask, but I was wondering if I could get a ride home, maybe. I found it really weird considering I had no idea who this guy was and didn't even recognize him as the face of one of the workers. Being the kind of guy I am, I told him I would as long as he paid me. They responded almost nervously. Yeah, man. Of course I got you. I told the guy to give me a few minutes to grab my things and punch out my shift and to meet me outside. He nodded and agreed. I felt somewhat weird about this situation, but I'd been in his shoes before. At least that's what I kept telling myself. I told one of the other guys when I was punching out that I had to give the weird new guy a ride home, and the other employees all made a strange face. The new guy? What are you talking about? I don't remember seeing any new guys. We both kind of shrugged it off, assuming that's just how this place operates these days. I went outside a few minutes later and saw the strange guy waiting next to my car. What I didn't find alarming back then, I really wish I would have. I never told the guy which car I actually drove, yet somehow he was already waiting by my car outside. We started the drive, and right away things started to get weird. I asked him where he lived and where we needed to go. He gave me some vague and confusing answer instead of telling me an address. I live on Maple Drive. Well, no, not anymore. I live on near the park. You know, Rose Park by the edge of the city. I was getting very frustrated. Okay, man, near the park. We're near the park. I just want to know where I'm dropping you off, dude. The guy said nothing for a few seconds, then just said near the park, head towards the park. I'll tell you where to go. I'm still kind of in awe at my stupidity. Even as I write this, you have to really understand that at this point in my life, I didn't really care about much. I just wanted to get from point A to point B in my day-to-day life and return home to my girl. I didn't really question anything. When we got close to the park, the man finally spoke up. Turn here. I stopped the car for a moment and said to this guy, are you sure? This doesn't even look like a street. The man just kept saying, yeah, right here. His voice was shaking. He nodded intently, and against my better judgment, I turned down that long and dark path. This was for sure not a road at all. It was a dirt path, and I couldn't see anything. I turned on my high beams. Thankfully, it was just in time. Obstructing the road in front of me was a massive fallen tree. Oh, dude. Looks like we're going to have to go another way or something. I'm not getting by this tree. The man didn't say anything. I looked over at him, and he had his hands in his hoodie. While I was looking at him, he said, get out of the car now. He kept moving his hands inside his sweatshirt as though he was trying to grab something he had concealed underneath. When I looked up out the windshield, I saw two more masked men coming from the side of the fallen tree. My heart was racing out of my chest at this point. I didn't know if I was going to get robbed or worse. The man in my car then screamed at the top of his lungs, get out now. I slowly started to open my car door. I noticed another two men step behind my car, also wearing masks. When my door was open and I'd started to step out, I noticed the man in my car had started to get out as well. That's when I made the single most daring decision of my entire life. When I noticed he was all the way outside the car, I jumped back in and reversed as fast as I could. Thankfully, he'd never ordered me to shut the car off, so the car was running this entire time. I may have ran over one of the potential robbers, or maybe I just bumped into a big tree branch. I couldn't be too sure in the heat of the moment, and I didn't really care either. When I got to the end of the dark path and was putting my car into drive so I could peel off, I looked back one last time and saw all five men sprinting directly at my car. They all appeared to be holding something in their hands, but I didn't bother to find out what they were carrying. I didn't alert the police for some reason either. When I got home, I was just so tense and anxious that I felt nauseous and needed to lie down. I called my managers the next day and told them about the incident, to which they replied they didn't hire anybody new in the last couple of weeks. I felt even more sick after hearing that. We looked at the cameras and saw the man had basically come out of the shadows when I parked my car for the night shift. They waited by my car for several hours, then finally went inside. Nobody said anything to this weird guy because help was so spread thin. Basically, nobody noticed him. He was watching me finish my shift for about an hour when he finally approached me. My manager said that they contacted the police, but I was never questioned, which I found kind of suspicious. That leads me to believe they never even actually reported it. To this day, I've still never reported it myself either. Honestly, it was so long ago at this point that I'm not really sure anything could be done even if I did. I only worked there for another month or so after the incident, and I never saw that strange man again. The only good thing that came from this horrible event was that the company finally started locking the doors for these overnight shifts. You may think that's an obvious thing to do, but you'd be surprised at just how relaxed certain businesses can be, especially when the managers aren't around. My advice to anybody who may be listening to this is to be careful. And if something feels weird, the chances are that you're right, and it is. To preface this, I live in a college town with 6 other young girls, all of us in our 20s. The city we live in is not that nice and has a huge homeless drug problem. Break-ins are not unusual either. What happened last Saturday, though, was definitely quite strange. My roommates and I, as well as some of our boyfriends, were hanging out and drinking in our house. 2 of the girls opted to go out to a bar, though. By around 1:00 a.m., the 2 girls had come home from the bar and everyone was really tired. We all went over to our respective rooms to retire for the night. As it got later on, though, I was awoken by someone opening my door and standing in my room, staring in at me. In my head, I thought it must have been one of my roommate's boyfriends, trying to see if my boyfriend and I were still awake to continue to party. Since I was so tired, I pretended to be asleep in order to avoid being bugged about it. After a bit, the person closed my door and proceeded to pace back and forth in the hallway. They then began to attempt to open my roommate's door, whose room was right next to mine. Luckily, her door was locked and she also had her boyfriend with her. The person then proceeded to go through our utensil drawer and grabbed a knife. I could hear them attempting to pick her lock after. After gaining some courage, I guess I heard her boyfriend shout, "Who the is that?" through the door. Obviously, that startled the man, who then sprinted up the stairs and back out the door. The police were called and did a search, but obviously they couldn't find anything. They told us break-ins like this are normal, which we all knew already. What makes this whole scenario creepier, though, is that he didn't steal anything at all. My phone, my expensive alcohol, and my $600 shoes were all untouched. This person was not on drugs or alcohol either, as they moved very quietly and deliberately. He was only able to get in at all because the 2 girls who came home from the bar forgot to lock the door behind them. I'm not sure what this man's intent was, but I'm forever grateful that I happened to have my boyfriend with me and pretended to be asleep. My boyfriend is not there often, as he lives 3 hours away. It gives me chills thinking that strange man was in my room and what could have happened to me had I been all alone. So let me first say, I don't know if this story I'm about to tell is super scary, but it is for sure the strangest thing that's ever happened to me. In the moment, it was really upsetting. It wasn't until I reflected on the evening that I realized just how strange an occurrence it really was. 5 years ago, I worked as a security guard for the strip mall. If you're not familiar with what a strip mall is, it's basically a block of stores in a single lot that's usually connected by one big building. The complex I worked for was a bigger building consisting of either 8 or 9 stores. There was also a restaurant as well. The strip mall was new at the time, and the management team wanted to keep the area clear of trouble and potential robbers. I figured someone trying to rob these stores would be a real long shot, though, since the surrounding area was a very high-S neighborhood, and there really was no crime here. I took the job mainly because I needed money, and I figured it would be very easy. I could sit in my car or in a back office that was located in the back of the building complex and just listen to podcasts or other audiobooks. That back office I mentioned served almost like a central hub for all the stores in the strip mall. Each of the store's back stock rooms, you could walk out into another hallway which would lead you down a long, narrow corridor, and they all led directly to the office. It was a small little room with monitors connected to the cameras in each one of the stores. Most nights, I just sat in that back office and waited until about 6:30 a.m. with nothing really happening. For all the years I did this job, only once did I ever have an intruder, and it still freaks me out to this day. The very first thing I did every night at 11:00 p.m. sharp when I showed up to work was check every lock on every store and make sure everything was buttoned up tight just in case. I usually then would walk around the entire mall parking lot. I would like to tell you that I was just being very diligent in my monitoring of the surroundings, but the real reason was to exercise my legs. I usually did this walk several times a shift. That night at around 2:00 in the morning, I was still sitting in the office when I thought I heard a crashing sound. Whatever it was loud enough to make me jump in surprise. The first thing I did was check all the cameras, of course, and made sure none of the alarms were going off either. Everything still looked to be locked up. It appeared like nothing was going on the alarms either. Whatever noise I had heard, I ended up just chalking it up to some sort of stock in one of the stores falling down or something. I did a quick walk by all the storefronts just to be sure, though, and saw nothing out of place or broken. Everything was still locked up tight. When I got back to the office was when I noticed something strange, though. One of the monitors, which was a CCTV camera feed from one of the stores, I could see what looked like a faint light. I just walked by all those stores less than 2 minutes prior and I'd seen no such thing. Whatever the strange glow was had just appeared. The cameras in these stores were not insanely high-tech, so I wasn't able to adjust the cameras to see any more of the store, only this one section it was pointed at. This store was an electronics store of some sort. They sold all kinds of tech and electronics, but their main selling point was that they would rent out cameras and microphones and all sorts of equipment for people. I made my way through the narrow hallway to the back room of that electronics store. From the back room, I could see the flickering light through the door that led inside the store. Before going through the door which separated the store's back room and the sales floor, though, I looked around the window to see if I could locate any intruder. To my amazement and horror, I saw there were two elderly people inside just standing in front of a gigantic TV watching a solid blue screen that said no signal. I had no idea how these two could have possibly gotten into the store. I checked the lock more than once, and there were clearly no signs of forced entry. I waited for several minutes to see if they would move or talk or do anything, but they never did. They just stood there still as statues watching this blue screen. Eventually, I decided to confront them. I made my way onto the cell's floor slowly and cautiously and asked what these two were doing. They couldn't be in there right now. The old woman of the two turned to me, who I could now clearly see was very old. She said to me, "I'm sorry, honey, this is the only show that makes him happy." I had no idea what she was talking about. She had tears flowing from her eyes. The man didn't even turn around. He just stood in an almost hunched-over position and continued to stare at the signal-less TV. After a moment, the woman turned back around and started to make these strange noises with her mouth. It was very unpleasant. I went into the back room and alerted my boss, who then alerted the authorities. It was quite clear to me that these elderly folk needed some help, really seriously. When I walked back onto the sales floor, though, they were already gone. I started to run around the room rather frantically because I still didn't know if these two were any danger to me. When I looked back up and out the window, I saw that somehow these two elderly folks had made it to the very end of the parking lot. When I made my call, they must have left. I had no idea how they'd gotten so far in such a short time, though. I noticed at this point the door was unlocked, so I know they left at the front door. That never explained, though, how they'd gotten inside in the first place. The only thing I can really think is that they were hiding in the store prior to them closing, which is still pretty unsettling. I tried shouting at them to come back, but they just kept on going. Then, without any prior warning or notice, they both darted into a heavily forested area that sat at the end of the strip mall complex. The fact these two older people moved so quickly was honestly remarkable. The police showed up moments later, and I explained the entire event to them. They actually laughed because the story seemed so strange and unbelievable. Even though it may have been funny to them in that moment, it was terrifying to me. Imagine just seeing these two very old people watching a blank TV in the middle of the night when you're all alone. I've read enough crazy news stories to know that just about anything is possible. After talking to the store owner, they were just as shocked and freaked out as I was. They said they didn't know of anyone who fit that description. I guess the police looked through dozens of hours of CC footage, but could never find when and where these two people had gotten into the building. Just thinking about that night and really just how creepy and weird it truly was, it really makes me feel weird. In a lot of ways, I feel bad because it shows the mind really does go after a while. For context, I live in a pretty rundown part of my city. This happened to me a few months ago back in July. I was invited to my friend's house for dinner. After I ate and watched a movie with him, I had to go home as it was getting pretty late now. I realized, though, that I didn't have enough for a ride home. I was also too embarrassed to borrow money from him. No worries, though. I lived just a short walk away from his house anyway. The rain wasn't that bad, and I did have my headphones so I could listen to tunes as I walked my broke-ass home. I walked on the empty road. Well, empty except for a few cars passing by occasionally. It was very comforting. I love these kinds of peaceful, lonely walks, very calming and all. Suddenly, though, two dudes came out of a building behind me. They tried to huddle close under my umbrella. Sure, they seemed harmless, and they were older than me. They seemed to be friendly, so I figured what was the harm. They started to make small talk. That slowly increased to very personal questions about my home life. I realized I had never seen these guys around town before. So I gave them fake names, fake hobbies, fake family. I wouldn't get over if this was some bizarre new scam method or something. "Hey, do you think your mother would miss you if you went missing?" One of the guys asked me. "Huh, what the hell are you talking about?" I replied. They were still acting all buddy-buddy with me, laughing, but I didn't take it as a joke. Call me or whatever, but the way they said that very casually really messed me up. I picked up the pace, but they still followed. Now I wasn't about to give these guys a tour of my house. When they started to get real creepy with the questions, I veered off course and started heading to the convenience store. I knew it had people in it right about now. Why don't you invite us over to your house for a cup of coffee? This dude, who I'd only met a few minutes ago, who I barely knew, now wanted to come to my house. I was really shaken at this point. The whole time we were walking, I had only taken short glances at them. I mustered up the courage to turn to my left so I could fully identify these people. The dude's face was different. He looked high, drunk maybe. I turned to the right. He smirked, then his face dropped. He then tried to pull something out from his pocket. That! I closed my umbrella and ran. I heard them running behind me. I ran harder. I looked back and could see they were gaining on me. I tripped, I slipped, and I got up each time. I could barely feel the muscles in my legs. I ran in and out of various alleyways to confuse them and lose them. The rain started to pour even harder. I hid behind a dumpster. I could hear them calling out my name, so I stayed put for a while. I only came out after I was sure they must have given up on the chase. I got to the store after walking a bit further. I went into the bathroom, looked at myself in the mirror, and threw up immediately. Maybe from adrenaline or maybe because I'd run like hell. I had cuts and bruises all over. Most notably, I realized a huge gash on my shirt. I realized the man had probably pulled out a knife and he must have tried to slash at me while I was hauling ass. I did what I should have done in the first place and called up a friend to drive me home. He thought I'd gotten up at a party or had some sort of street brawl. I got home drenched and had the longest shower after. I never did tell anyone this story. Well, not up until now anyway. I threw away that shirt and my headphones were destroyed by the rain. A small price to pay for an escape, I guess, though. I hope they were just high or drunk. If they were legit going to commit a felony on me, I also hope on the first and last one they ever attempt. Let me start by saying that I was really only looking to hook up. I had just been dumped by my boyfriend, and I'm not the bar type. I figured that an online dating service would be a more reasonable option. I used a local personal service, and I've been talking to this guy for about 2 days before agreeing to meet up with him. His name was Mike, and he told me that he used online dating because he was suffering from depression and was on a medication that made it hard for him to perform. He decided it was easier to meet women this way so they could know beforehand than to meet up in person and have to explain when they started getting physical. He went on to tell me, though, that he had a good feeling about me and that I was exciting to him despite his medication. Okay, seemed cool enough. I decided to go over to his place to see if we really did have any chemistry. We both seemed to be looking for the same thing, a hookup. When I got there, he was waiting for me in the living room. We started making out and I could tell he was getting a little aroused, but was having some issues. When he said that he knew what would help and that it was in his bedroom, I willingly followed. Walking in, I couldn't help but notice his bed being surrounded by cat condos. Lots and lots of them. Some structured to be as tall as I was. I knew that he had cats, but I assumed he'd meant 1 or 2 and that they were just hiding when I came over. Nope, he had 10, which all came out from underneath the bed. When we sat on it, they all rushed out and went to their perches on the cat condos to watch us after rubbing against him. He then went on to start making out with me again and was massively aroused. At this point, I was massively creeped out, though. I like cats and I have some myself, but having them watch me pee freaks me out, much less them watching me be intimate with someone. I excused myself openly, admitting this was a little bit too strange for me. I left and he followed me, begging me to give him another chance and help him. I left anyway. For the next few days, he continued to message me, asking me to come over and saying he'd made some real progress with me. I blocked him after receiving a photo of him nude on the bed surrounded by the cats. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you liked the video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have any feedback for me as well, be sure to leave that in comments below the video. If you guys have a story you'd like to send in, or if you'd like to contact me for any reasons, there will be links to my social media in the description below the video, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is, if it has one, what type of story it is, if it has one, and how you'd like to be credited in the description below the video. Please make sure to include as much detail as you feel comfortable with, and try to use as much proper grammar as possible to make sure you have the highest chance of appearing in a future video. Overall, I think that's pretty much it for now, guys. So thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day. What do you think about these tales of the unexpected? Share your reflections in the comments, and remember to tap the bell icon so you never miss another story from our collection.